Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Heidi Horsley, and I'm here today with my co-host, Alan Pedersen. Hi, Alan.
How are you, Heidi?
Good. I am so excited you're here today. So Alan has co-hosted a lot of shows with me.
I have.
Yes, when Gloria can't come, Alan steps in, which I appreciate.
When the best can't be here, you settle for me, and it's always fun.
You are awesome, and you know you are the best because we actually won an award once, a really big one, and I was not the co-host. Alan was.
I was.
I was
and
not
I don't
here.
even remember the show, but it must have been good.
It was very good.
Yeah, I think so.
So we have a lot of guests today, and
We do.
we are talking about something so important, and it is grief as a teacher.
Yeah, I like this subject today, and in talking to the guests a little bit earlier, we have just this wide variety of people that have had experiences in and around grief and loss, and the lessons learned. I mean, we'll be able to scratch the surface today, but we've always believed that you learn life lessons. Grief work is life work, and there is so much to be learned if you sit back and take in what you're going through. And I'm so excited that we get to share some of the nuggets of wisdom and things that grief and loss have taught our guests today.
Me too. And sometimes early on in grief, it's kind of like disrespectful and rude to think that there is any teaching that goes on in grief.
Right.
But further down the road, you really do see what you've learned and that it has been one of your best teachers.
Yeah, it is. It's a long-term proposition, but I know very few people who've gone through loss and over the years can't look back and say, you know what, I'm a better this or I'm a better that than I was before I had my loss. So, we talk a lot on this show about the pain and the loss, and it's horrible, and it is. So it's nice, though, to say there are also some things we gain from grief, and we always want to make sure that we give time to that, give a voice to that, because grief's going to take you somewhere, and it's going to take you somewhere with probably new priorities, new friends, and new experiences in your life if you're open to them. So, yeah,
absolutely.
Great subject today.
I will start and introduce the guests, but first I want to introduce you a little bit. Most of the people out there know you, but not everybody. So Alan Pedersen is an award-winning singer and songwriter. His daughter Ashley died in a car accident at 18 years old. And since then, Alan has presented programs for grieving families in over 1,600 cities. Alan is the former executive director for the Compassionate Friends and served on their national board of directors. So thank you for co-hosting with me.
No wonder I'm tired. Yeah, I've been busy.
You have been busy. You've been very busy. Okay, so we'll start with who's next to you. Jordon Ferber is one of our regulars on this show. He does a lot in the grief and loss world. He is a New York City comedian. He's very funny. He talks about grief and loss in funny ways that we can hear it, I would say. He's a public speaker, and he presents workshops and facilitates sibling support groups for the Compassionate Friends. His brother Russell was killed in a car accident at 21 years old. Jordon hosts the podcast, Where's the Grief? Very good podcast. And he and his family founded the Russell Ferber Foundation. So welcome, Jordon.
Yeah, good to be here.
Really good to have you back.
Go Knicks, go Knicks.
Oh yeah, go Knicks, always.
Next to him is Carin Mikos.
Thank you.
Carin is a registered nurse, creator of the Quietus House, and a concierge service designed to support folks at the end of life and provide grief support. Carin hosts the podcast In the Gap and is featured in the book Faces of Grief, which we have here and we're going to show you right now. Welcome, Carin.
Thank you very much.
And next to Carin is Jan Jeremias. Jan is a compassionate health coach, and the best-selling author of the book Spoil Your Pet, a practical guide to using essential oils in dogs and cats. I have a dog that would love this. Jan has developed an integrative approach to vibrant health rooted in nutrition, movement, yoga, essential oils, and meditation. She is featured also in the book Faces of Grief. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
And next to Jan is Kelli Holst. Hopefully I got that right.
Yep.
All right.
Yay. Kelli is the founder of Waylyn's Heart, an organization she started in memory of her 17-year-old son Waylyn, who died in a car accident. Kelli sponsors online informative workshops to help those new in grief to have access to helpful information. And I know you and Kelli work together.
We're working on a project right now as we speak.
I love it. Welcome, Kelli.
Thank you.
And next to Kelli is Bill Correll. Did I get that right, Bill?
Perfect.
Wonderful. Bill is a certified life and business coach. He has lost over 25 loved ones since the beginning of COVID, including his best friend and his father, who died in 2023. Bill has a podcast called Lightening the Candle, A World That Works. He is featured also in the book Faces of Grief. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Heidi.
And then on the end, another one of our favorite guests here. We've had Jason on quite a few, and his name is Jason Wendroff-Rawnicki. Took me a while to get that right, but I got it. And Jason has brought together many of our guests today because they are going to talk later on about Faces of Grief, the book that they are all in. So thank you for that, Jason.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
So Jason Wendroff-Rawnicki is a somatic grief therapist with a master's degree in psychology from Columbia University. He presents workshops for the Compassionate Friends conferences. His sister Lauren died in a car accident at 24 years old. And Jason started SIBS Online, a weekly peer support group for bereaved siblings, and is also featured in the book, like I've said, Faces of Grief. So welcome, everybody. We got that.
I just realized if we had a shortstop, we'd have an entire baseball team here.
Completely. We've got so many phenomenal guests today, Alan.
Yeah, you know, I think we all know what the topic of today's show is, and I'd like each of you to maybe think of one important thing you've learned in grief, because I really want to get to the heart of the matter. And how about we start down there with you, Bill? You've had a lot of loss, and that's its own subject, collective loss and grief overload. But can you talk a little bit about some things that this loss has taught you?
You're going to get what I'm feeling right now. I think I learned that there wasn't anything to get over. What I learned was I'm a practiced and trained person who is present, who is always mindful and is able to come back to a situation after being knocked off of my feet. Well, at some point that kind of went away, and I wasn't making choices that were either good for me or for my family. I think they wanted me to stay around, and I wasn't behaving like I wanted to continue to be here. And it always felt like, we've got these people that are close to the end, and when they're gone, maybe we'll get a minute. That minute never came. And I had to find out, who I was in that moment. If I wanted to stand up for me and for my beautiful bride of almost 50 years and my grandchildren and my family, do I want to continue being here, and do I want to continue being powerful in the world and making a difference with people? So I just decided that's what my goal is. And I also learned I knew nothing about accessing grief, any of the language. There's a jargon that allows you to get some distinctions and access to how you're feeling in a way that's almost communicable to other people. But I also found out that everyone that I've come in contact with, no two people have had the same thing happen to them or the same kind of loss, but people have a very profound relationship to the grief that they're experiencing.
I know you, Jordon. What have you learned about the importance of, in grief, like kind of educating yourself about what you're going through and having knowledge of the experience?
I think the biggest thing I've learned is that you're never alone when you don't want to be, that it's a human experience, that we all go through it in some way, and being able to be open about it and talk about it with other people, I think it brings people together, realizing that there's a community that wants to support you, that wants to be able to express their own wants and desires and sorrows as well. It's freeing to be able to be open about it, I think.
Right. You fire away a question. I know you got a bunch.
I do. I think just on the same line that we're talking about right now, and maybe we'll have Carin answer this question.
So for me, what I've learned through grief is community is everything.
Yep.
Like you really need to find your tribe, your support, your way of expressing your grief, and really that's unique to everybody. It's not the same for everybody.
And let me follow that up, because a lot of people that might be watching, when we say community and find your support, can you give some examples? Like, do we go on Facebook? Do we go online? Do we get a book? Do we find a support group? What are some of the things you've learned are effective? And I realize it's different for everybody else.
Yeah, I think online is a great place to start. And I think community church, community groups are listed online. You can access all that, and then you try them out. There's not one group that fits everybody, so try it out. Test it, call somebody, get support or references from other people that maybe have been through something similar. You could say, this is what I've done. Really reaching out, which is one of the hardest things I've discovered when you're grieving. But it's there. Right. And I think having the conversation about grief before you're actually in the middle of it will set you up to be able to take some actions during the grieving process to reach out, to find your community. Maybe even find it before you're there.
Great point. Kelli, what have you learned in this grief journey since Waylyn's death?
I've learned so many different things. I don't want to be a downer, but I've learned that you can have more than one family. I learned my family disappeared after my son passed away, and if it wasn't for the compassionate friends, I don't know that I'd be sitting here talking. So I consider you guys more family than my original family. I've learned that you can't take things for granted. I've learned that you need to be real, and you need to just love everything and everybody for every second that you have.
I think that's a great point, because Heidi, over the 20 years you and I have been working together, wouldn't you say that that's one of the more common concerns we hear from grieving people is the people in my life that I was just sure were going to be there. I mean, I knew this, I'd had this lifelong friendship. Sometimes they can't handle our grief. Right. Yet they'll say, then someone on the periphery who I barely knew stepped right in. Yeah. That's
Definitely.
very common. Has anybody here kind of experienced that? And would care to talk about it, Bill?
Oh, sure. I think I had to go out of my house in order to meet those people. Yeah. Having come off 2 years of being a shut-in with COVID and everything, doing Zoom meetings all over the world where we all showed up authentically and were ourselves every time we were on Zoom, right? No, we weren't. But the point was, they didn't tell us what they were grieving. We didn't tell them what I was grieving. I didn't even know that I could call it grief. I really just hated it. It just sucked, okay? And when I finally did come out and meet some people, I found out there's this whole world out here of folks talking to each other openly about what they don't know. And that access to other people who are out there kind of groping in the dark along with you gives you that community and that camaraderie and just the strength to know that you've got some new person you can call. Yeah. I don't know what this is all about, but I just wanted to see if you might have a joke that you could tell me or something like that.
Jan, I can see you nodding.
That's what I was
Now you
Jan's thoughts?
Jan is my twin.
So now you get to opine on whatever you want to. So
No, I looked at it as it taught me something totally different in a way. For me, it taught me to trust myself. That there was no one else who knew my grief or knew what I was going through better than I did.
Yeah.
And I think coming from a place where I don't know that I necessarily trusted myself or trusted the way I felt for many years, all of a sudden I had to tap into that.
Right.
And it was, in a way, so empowering because I had sort of forfeited my powers for so many years and sort of looked outside myself for solutions. And I had to look within myself for the solutions that were going to make me feel better. And so all of a sudden, now years later, I realized the tools I used, which are now common tools, which I didn't know were tools, but they were so innate to me. And I had to learn how to listen to that sort of innate wisdom that I had and to use that to empower me to go forward. And yes, I connected with other people, but it was more about connecting within for me.
Right.
I like that.
Jason, what have you learned about, you have an interesting story, and I know we're not going to tell it all today, but the way his life changed. What have you learned about changing maybe your life direction or your life work and helping others? Because that's all incorporated in your life. What has grief taught you about that?
Well, it's taught me a lot. The main thing is that grief is part of who I am. It's not all of who I am. In the beginning, it was everything. Like I was just a ball of a mess because grief was my total identity. But when I realized I was so much more than my grief, and I could still be a son and a husband and a yoga teacher and all of these different parts of myself, it started to broaden my perspective on life itself. And that grief is part of the life, but it's not the only life that I have. And so that was one of my biggest learnings, as well as, and if I heard this when I was in my early stages, I would have gone ballistic. But struggle is inevitable. We're all going to have our challenges, but the pain is a choice, like that we make to stay in that pain. And when I realized that, I had the choice to get out of that pain and not stay in it. And so doing things physically for me was the key out of that pain, starting to exercise more, eating better, getting my body in a shape that was going to make me feel healthy and vibrant. And a healthy body then translates into a healthy mind. And once that mind is healthy, then you can deal with the emotional and the mental struggles of grief even more effectively. So.
Well, and I think for many people, at least this was true in my case after my brother died, after somebody dies that you're close to, it's an identity loss. You are all in your grief.
Yeah.
It's like, who am I now? Why am I here? What's the purpose of life? Who am I without my brother that I thought was going to be here forever? And then, like you said, as we transition and our grief changes over time, we create a new normal. We create a new identity. We become, I was in fashion merchandising when my brother died. Clearly, I don't do that now. It's really transformed everything about who I am.
Jordon, let me kind of dovetail a little bit
Yep.
with what Jason is saying, because again, I know your story, and you talk about a person reluctant to the grief party. This guy, when I first met him, was a comedian, and we met for dinner. I was doing an event for your parents, and he wouldn't go to the event. I know you don't like my singing, but that's another story. But he shows up at this at dinner, and he's like, yeah, I'm here for the dinner, and I don't do the grief part. And then the next time I see him is a couple of years later at a national conference for the Compassionate Friends, and I'm like, what are you doing here? Where's your parents?
And now he's a keynote.
The irony is not lost on me that I started going to Compassionate Friends so that my parents would shut up about it.
Right.
And now I run it and they don't come.
Well, I think the reason why I love your story, and maybe somebody else might have some thoughts on this, is we think when we're in grief that where we are right now, at whatever stage you're in, is where I'm always going to be.
Right.
And if you can just stay open to the idea that grief's going to take you somewhere, you don't know where.
Yeah, this grief, COVID, really. I was a home care nurse. I was doing visits to assisted living facilities, skilled nursing facilities during COVID, seeing the families on one side and the patients on the other side of the glass. It just, I knew that grief was a problem, like as a world, grief crisis, all kinds of loss that we went through during COVID, loss of identity, loss of community, loss of job, like just everything, not to mention life in itself. And
Loss of purpose.
yeah, it just really struck me, and I had to do something. I wasn't sure what that was, so I just started looking. And I landed at the Quietus House.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I think grief taught me too something important. When my daughter Ashley first died, the world I was in of support was all about, if you lost a child, you had the greatest loss, you've had the worst loss. And I certainly respect it's a horrible loss. But over time I began to learn that, the saying, when does grief hurt the most? When it's yours. And I tell a story of, I flew with a lady on an airplane, and after Ashley had just died, and I didn't want to talk, but she wouldn't shut up, and so I decided I'd tell her, a few months ago my daughter was killed in an automobile accident, and she said, oh, I know exactly how you feel because my cat Buttons just died. And I wanted to slap her, but of course I wanted to also get to Houston, so but I tell people, if that happened today to me, I would simply say to her, I'm sorry, because I went to the deepest place of grief that I knew, and she tried to join me there, and at that moment that was her loss of her cat Buttons. So I want to touch on pet loss, because I used to laugh at, now I don't don't hate me, but I like minimize it. But today I know people who lost children, husbands, and this pet becomes who they are. And I know you are the expert. And can you talk a little bit about pet loss and the impact it can have on people?
Well, I think that there's multiple things that happen with a pet, depending on, the household. And, so pets, I don't want to say solve, but pets are there for people during loneliness, as we saw during COVID, during the pandemic. And there's also a special relationship between a human and an animal, and that is one of unconditional love. There's no judgment, there's no agenda, it's just pure love. And we don't have many relationships, human relationships, if any, that are totally pure like that. So I think when someone loses a pet, it's like totally devastating. I remember going through when my first dog passed away at the age of 19. So that's old for a dog, and she was a big dog. And so she had been with me for 19 years through everything, through job changes, through divorce, through illness. And all of a sudden that anchor for me, and she was my anchor, was gone. And so I think in that way, I think it's hard because, like many different types of losses, our culture does not acknowledge that it is a loss.
True.
And people kind of belittle it and say, oh, well, you'll get another dog or you'll get another cat. Like each one is so easily replaceable. Plus, there's also the last thing is the fact that, with animals, we have a choice as to when they pass in a lot of cases. And so that process of like choosing the right time and how and everything is very, and it's a personal decision that we all have to make.
Kelli, she jokingly says she lives in North Dakota and she has a funny farm. But can you talk a little bit about what you've learned about having these animals and has it helped in the grieving process?
Yes, I sincerely think that without my animals that I would have really gotten in a dark spot.
Wow.
I had a potbelly pig and she lived in the house and she lived in the house until she learned how to open the cupboard doors with her snout. But she, I accidentally ran over her and I thought I was losing a part of myself. I laid down next to her and on the floor and I hugged her and told her how much I loved her. She did end up making it, but I was devastated that I thought I was going to lose her.
So would you agree with the saying that pets are healing because it gives love a place to go?
Absolutely.
To complete that.
Absolutely.
That action of it.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. I would like to hear a little bit about those of you that have podcasts and books. Can we just hear a little bit about your life? And we'll start with you, Jordon. You have a fantastic podcast.
My podcast, Where's the Grief? I interview other comedians who have experienced tragic loss, although I like to tell people it's not all comedians. I do interview other sad people too. And I think it's, like what all of us have been talking about, I think it's really helpful to be able to talk about this stuff to normalize the conversations that we have about grief so that we can talk about it the same way we talk about everything else. So with inappropriate humor sometimes.
Exactly.
I feel like humor is what brings people together sometimes, that those laughs of recognition, of inclusion, of being part of, sometimes there's, you're not belittling the process, but laughing about the fact that you're not alone in it, that you recognize of the absurdity of some of it.
It's awesome. A little bit about you, what you're doing, your organization.
We create legacy projects to just perpetuate the love, And as a nurse, I can provide bedside support. And what I really, really love, what I'm really passionate about, is the grief support. And like I said earlier, I just really help people discover how to express that grief. It could be through journal writing, music. I collaborate with other folks that do some movement stuff. I was thinking about what Jason does, just to help relocate that grief so it's not so overwhelming, so consuming.
Awesome. And Jan, tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
So I'm a health and wellness coach. I came into that area through my pets, actually. I was a clinical research scientist for 24 years, so I was very brainy and very analytical, and if it didn't happen in the lab, it didn't happen. And pets are a great way to demonstrate holistic healing and alternative modalities because there is no placebo effect. They're not going home and saying, maybe it was in my head and it was my imagination, And so that was kind of like my entryway in. So that helped me to co-author my book, Spoil Your Pet. And then I have a podcast, Pets, People, Life, and Longevity, which is all about life with a pet.
Awesome.
So,
Pets,
yeah.
people, life, and longevity.
Yeah.
Like it.
That's awesome. And then Kelly, we talked a little bit about this new project you and I are doing called Waylyn's Heart. And Waylyn's known for his heart, so we're basically going to do some online workshops
Yes.
For people, and we want to make it so that everybody can afford to do these workshops on healing, guilt, and regret. Kind of a new venture for you,
Yeah.
so we're excited about that.
Yep.
Tell us about your podcast, Bill, and all the stuff
Well,
you're doing.
I am a co-host of that particular
Okay.
podcast. My twin
I love
sitting
it.
here, Jan. If you ever tune it in, what you're going to find out is we start from nothing. We actually just parachute into a conversation, and what are we going to talk about today? And Jan would always ask me, for about a year, what are we going to talk about today, Jan? I said, I don't know, but I'll bet it'll take an hour.
I love it. And give us the name of the podcast again.
Yeah, so
Bill, what's the name of the podcast?
podcast is Lighting the Candle, A World That Works. So this came out of watching the Northwest be on fire 4 years ago. And I said, it seems that all you can find online is people that are talking about the horribleness of being an American or being a this or being a that. Why don't we just see if we can create something that's kind of a positive thing for people? And so we've talked to, about empowerment, how to find empowerment, using the 3 methods of, asking the audience or phoning a friend or, whatever. But the point is that everyone has a birthright of being completely, authentically themselves. And if they're not feeling good, it's more often than not that their integrity is not in place, and we need to have ways, language-wise, to get back to where we're feeling powerful again.
I love that.
Jan and I have a ball every single week. We know if we've gotten things across, if we get goosebumps, or if we laugh uncontrollably, we've done a good podcast.
Well, let's get us over
Awesome,
to
Bill.
Jason.
Thank you.
Strictly tell us what your how we get a hold of you, what you're doing.
Sure. I do somatic grief therapy, which is a very body-centered approach to grief, so where you can learn to figure out where in your body you hold on to your grief and different ways that you can release it. I also work a lot with mindset as well, because it's really important to kind of go in both directions. And then I also have the online peer support group for bereaved siblings, which is www.siblingisland.com. And you can hop on my email list, and we have meetings every week. Jordan's meeting is included in that weekly update.
I refer a lot of people to both Jason and Jordan and everything they're doing, because they are building such awareness on such a big level for the siblings out there. Thank you for that. So open to the idea that someday we will have hope again, which is why we called our organization Open to Hope. So on that note, Alan, I think I want to thank you.
Thank you.
My job was easy. I just sit back and let this happen. And thank all of our guests today. And we always close the show by saying, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
Thank you.